Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra. Glad to have the Forum's Mike McFeely join us here on what has turned into a rather newsy Wednesday. It's not Northern Illinois fan line, but it might look like that for the next 5 to 7 minutes with the news that was broke last night, Michael, from Brett McMurphy from the Action Network. And I know with all your reporting on this, and kudos on that, that looks like the Mountain West in Northern Illinois are back together again after interest was waning and about a month ago.
Said to be waning. Said to be waning.
Yeah, said to be waning. That looks like NIU is going to be the ninth football member of the Mountain West Conference.
It does look like that, and more importantly to this guy, it looks like North Dakota State is, that means they're out.
Yeah.
You know, the Mountain West was looking to add one football-only school, and if there was hope that they were going to add two or that they were going to do something else, I have a source out west that told me this morning this is pretty much it. North Dakota State looks like they're out, and so it's FCS for the foreseeable future for NDSU, which I found interesting at Tim Polsek's press conference yesterday, that he went out of his way to mention that he thinks that FCS is just fine.
Pretty good right now.
And there's a lot of good teams there, and that Abilene Christian is going to be a force to be reckoned with, and Mercer looks really good to him. And I don't, you know, he was at Northern Illinois for a while, and so I don't know if he still has sources.
Or the writing was on the wall.
Or the writing was on the wall with his own people at the buildings up north in North Fargo. But it seemed to me like he was trying to sort of send an early message there that
something shot across the bow. This was coming.
Don't get too excited about the Mountain West anymore, guys.
So you have been reporting on this extensively. Let's for people that maybe weren't following as close. Did the Mountain West, from your reporting, and Northern Illinois ever really break up? I don't believe that was the case.
I don't. I remember when you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago that. You know, you said, well, Northern Illinois and Toledo are out, right? And I said, I don't know if they are or not, because my sources were telling me that it wasn't necessarily the case. That, yeah, maybe there was some back and forth. There was obviously negotiations going on.
Yes.
And one of the reporters out there nationally said that Northern Illinois is going to get some more cash, which that's all part of it. And so I don't think that Northern Illinois was ever out of the deal. And as I wrote a couple weeks ago as well, you know, the Mountain West presidents put themselves out there and publicly said, we're going to talk with Northern Illinois and Toledo. And when presidents do that, that means they're very serious and they don't want to.
They're targeting them.
They're targeting them. So they wanted them for some reason,
Correct.
whatever that reason was, they wanted Northern Illinois. And so to think that they were just going to back off and just go, okay, well, we'll take NDSU instead, I don't think that was ever going to happen.
So the news also yesterday came out that UC Davis was being added to the Mountain West, but in every sport but football, which I know we were talking yesterday. Does that mean there would be a door open for Davis to join in football?
And that's what I thought. I thought first of all,
down the road.
I thought first of all, well, okay, so I knew that Davis was in the Big West for all their other sports, and in the Big Sky as a football member only in the Big Sky for UC Davis. So I thought, well, okay, maybe they still want a football-only school, and maybe that still leaves the door open for North Dakota State, because we still didn't know yesterday at that time whether Northern Illinois was
in or
out,
out,
what the story was. But then later in the day, it made sense. Then once Northern Illinois became public that they were going to be the team, then you went, okay, so Davis didn't want to take on the expense of having a football program elevate, so they got the perfect scenario from their standpoint.
God, absolutely.
And then, you know, it's the reverse of what NDSU wanted, which is football only, but Davis got all the other sports.
All right, so on the back end of this, on the Bison side, because I had people ask me, well, what about the MAC, Dom? And we both have talked with sources on this. I don't think North Dakota State wants anything really to do with the MAC.
I don't think so. The indication I got from my sources is that actually Conference USA, a while back, was maybe more on the forefront even than the Mountain West for NDSU, that they were looking, well, okay, how can we do this? What's the best fit? How can we get there? And Conference USA was one I've heard a couple of times from people. That doesn't look like that's going to happen for now, but the MAC to me just doesn't. I don't know what they gain from going. Again, if it's the MAC and they're going to replace Northern Illinois, the MAC is going to want all the sports.
They want everything, right?
And so, and if you're NDSU, do you want to take that financial jump and go, well, so for football, we're going to play in the MAC, and I don't know what that does for you necessarily, playing on Wednesday nights.
Tuesday and Wednesday nights,
You're playing Eastern Michigan on a Tuesday night.
Yep.
That just doesn't get people revved up, and so I just don't think that's going to happen.
So you described this initially 5 years ago. You wrote about his moonshot.
Yes.
Is the moonshot done for now?
Yes. Well, now it's back to being a moonshot. I think a couple weeks ago you asked me, is it still a moonshot?
Yeah.
I said, no. Now it's a transatlantic crossing in a rowboat.
Yeah, a month ago when that story
And so,
came
but
out.
now we're back to the moonshot again.
Yeah.
So it's not gone completely, but it's certainly way, 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 way far off.
The point needs to be made, and you wrote about this, and hammer this one home for people watching and listening to this later. The Mountain West, I think, the entire time was looking at an FBS school, an established FBS school. I don't think.
Now just a second.
Right?
Now, there was a faction in the Mountain West, and an important one, that favored NDSU, that supported NDSU.
Okay.
The people who count,
wanted an FBS school.
the 8 schools that count, the 8 people who count, wanted an FBS school, and I don't think that connection was ever. I don't know it was
Bridged
ever
there.
narrowed
Okay,
or bridged.
okay.
And so in the end it's the presidents and to some extent the athletic directors, because they're the ones making the call too, that said, no, we want an FBS school. And it wasn't, I was told recently, the resistance to an FCS school, to NDSU, it wasn't about the SEC and Greg Sankey and the Big Ten. I think that had to do with some other schools that the Mountain West was talking about, and that may have triggered a passionate phone call from Greg Sankey.
A reaction there.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what I was told was that the Sankey and the Big Ten didn't so much care about North Dakota State. That they were fine.
Okay.
But the presidents wanted an FBS because they didn't want the 2-year transition, and they thought the optics of we're dipping down into FCS for a football team looked bad. But those others who supported NDSU are saying, well, but what can which is a more impactful addition? Northern Illinois or Louisiana Tech or North Dakota State.
Right.
And the one faction said clearly North Dakota State because it has the national brand that you have in FCS, as much as that counts. You have all the national championships. You have all the draft choices, Trey Lance and Carson Wentz. You have all of those things. And that people nationally are going to step up and go, hey, that's a great addition.
Right, that would have
popped.
Be fun. Right, if it ever with the addition, if the press conference or the press release would have went out, that would have popped nationally.
Yeah, but the presidents didn't look at it that way and just said, you know what, we want an FBS.
And now the Mountain West, that for whatever it's worth, can brag, Mike. They have schools in Hawaii, the 4 time zones: Hawaii, the Hawaiian time zone, Pacific Mountain, and Central time zone, which no one else has.
Let's be clear, Northern Illinois is not. They beat Notre Dame this year.
Right.
I mean,
just saw that.
And Tim Polsek has been at Northern Illinois, and it's not like
Akron. I'll throw out a MAC school.
Right,
it's not Akron.
Right. It's not Akron, or it's not. I mean, Northern Illinois is legit.
Right.
I mean, they're legit in football and have been for a long time. So it's not. This isn't like adding Kennesaw State or Sam Houston with I mean, this is adding a legitimate, long-time FBS school that, frankly, beat Notre Dame this year.
Correct.
Made national headlines.
Didn't help or didn't hurt their chances there with the victory in South Bend. Speaking of victories in the state of Indiana, there's my segue.
Look at that.
The Bison men's basketball team got a big one last night. They might have done everything maybe to give the game away, but they came up with some big plays. Jackson Money was huge down the stretch, Michael, and the Bison got a nice win against the Butler Bulldogs last night.
And I think you referred to it as a signature win, and they weren't ranked. Butler wasn't ranked, and they're not a power, but they are a darn good Big East team. They were picked 8th in the Big East to start the year, but
their net's pretty good.
But none of the preseason stuff matters in the transfer portal era. But I believe it's the highest ranked net rating team that Dave Richmond has defeated in his time as the head coach of North Dakota State. So it's as close to a signature win as he's gotten in a non-conference game. Obviously, Dave has won a handful of Summit League championship games, which are bigger in the long run.
Yes.
But he needed something. The Bison basketball program and Dave Richmond needed something to get people to sit up straight and go, hey, it's a good win.
Yes.
I mean, that's not Dickinson State. That's not dismissing Moorhead State. This is a team that people know about. Butler, they know about Hinkle Fieldhouse. They know about the Big East Conference. Connecticut's in that conference.
Yep.
They're pretty good. Marquette's in that conference. They're pretty good. You know, and so
Creighton's in that league.
right,
They're pretty good.
they're pretty good. And so Dave just needed something to pop, so people would go, hey, let's go to the game. Maybe not Friday at noon against Wisconsin Stout, but let's go to
Western Michigan.
Let's go to Kansas City. Let's go to South Dakota. And I think that's going to accomplish that and have people show some interest.
Money and White are playing at different levels. This changed your outlook of what this team can do when we get to January and the conference begins?
I think what changed it for me was actually the Weber State game a week or so
that was
ago.
A good win
and then
too.
The Northern Colorado game on Saturday night. I know that people were coming down off the football game in the Fargo Dome right across the street. But those two, Northern Colorado also had a pretty good net ranking at one point this year and beat South Dakota State earlier. And so those two wins, I kind of went, well, okay, that's better. And Jackson Money now is healthy, and they seem to be getting more healthy. And so I think last night was sort of a it's legit, and they almost didn't happen. And Butler was they had a couple of kids that were just bulldozers out there that NDSU couldn't guard. But in the end, they made the plays they had to make, even with a couple of baffling decisions down the stretch there. But they won the game, and they deserve to celebrate.
Money's pretty darn good. West Fargo kid, man. Started his career the last 3 years at Northern State with Saul Phillips. He's been
I kept
dynamic.
asking Saul Phillips for the 3 years that I covered the Northern State, Moorhead State games over in Dragonville. I kept asking Saul, why is Jackson Money not in the Summit League? And Saul kept going, shh, we don't want anybody to know about him. We just be quiet, Mike. I don't know why he's not in the Summit League, and I don't care. I got him. But Jackson took his one last year to play and ended up going to North Dakota State.
NDSU's benefit, man. They're enjoying that right now. We'll break. We come back. We'll chat some footballs. The Bison get ready for the Mercer Bears, the conference champions of the SoCon, for a quarterfinal game. We'll look at that, the other matchups this weekend when the Bison Media Zone returns on WDAY Extra right after this. Back here on the Bison Media Zone. NDSU fans don't need to remember that Sam Hicks was pretty good. This is a 90-yard touchdown run, part of Abilene Christian's 17-3 start in this game. Mike, that's the second week in a row that the Bison had a slow start. Tim Polisic brought that up emphatically in the press conference yesterday, that was a point of emphasis with the team on Monday, and said, frankly, Mercer is the Super Bowl this week. What'd you make of what he had to say yesterday?
Well, what I made was that we kind of get a little flavor of what it's like to be in a team meeting with Tim Polisic because he has emotions and he wears them on his sleeve.
Little morsels of that on Tuesday.
And you caught some of that yesterday. I just said that. We need to be ready to play. And he's like sitting there going, yeah.
I got it. So I was asking the question, though, like what was specifically why, but I don't know what you lead into that. The crowd is a thing. Obviously, opponent, I think.
Well, no, I think clearly what he was saying. He didn't say the word like Jimmy Rogers said publicly, but he said, I think that we're wondering if this was a big enough game for us. So clearly he was intimating that his players are looking ahead to the semifinals against South Dakota State, and so they were wondering whether it was worth their time to get jacked up about Abilene Christian, or whether it was worth their time to get jacked up about Mercer. And Tim Polisic emphatically said, yes, this is the Super Bowl this week. Then we'll worry about what's in front of us after that.
And they found out. I mean, Abilene made a couple big plays, and we're looking at each other. Like Bison were in trouble at 17-3 in that game.
And it's Abilene Christian, so you go, well, how good are they, and who have they played? And they, they lost to Stephen F. Austin. They stunk when they were doing it, and all of that stuff. But then when I walked into the Fargo Dome and I walked through the ramp and then walk across the back of the end zone, and the Abilene Christian players were warming up in the end zone, and the quarterback was throwing some balls to the receivers, and a couple of the receivers, I went, oh, okay. These guys, this doesn't look like Murray State. These guys are a little bit bigger, faster, stronger than Murray State. And I think Tim mentioned yesterday that that running back that we saw, and then the receiver number 20, Nehemiah, and I forget his last name. I apologize. Martinez, the kid who had the long kick. He said those two kids are about as good of players as we've seen at those positions this year. And Abilene Christian is going to be able to do that, for the future.
Location where they're at.
Right. But to your point, NDSU, I think, is going to be ready to go this week. I think I think there's pressure on these seniors for North Dakota State. There's pressure on the seniors, whether it's Cam Miller, whether it's Gray Zabel, whether it's Nick Kubitz. You name these guys who have been here for 5 years. They finally got over the hump and beat South Dakota State, so that one's gone, right? But now the next thing is they know what's coming up in the semifinals. If they can win Saturday, they know it's coming up, and they want to do it again. And so, I mean, just gripping the steering wheel.
Gotta be.
Like you're driving on a rain-slicked highway, and it's 18 degrees outside. You're just trying to keep it between the lines for the next 50 miles.
And everyone expects you to win, by the way, leading up to that point too, that's got to be tough to deal with.
I'm going to go ahead and say this, that when Gray Zabel, for example, stops into Shields to buy something, that the person behind the counter is not going, how about Mercer?
Yeah.
Boy, it's going to be a heck of a, they're saying,
ready for the Jacks?
Beat the Jacks.
Yeah, exactly right.
Beat the Jacks.
With that said, Mercer comes to town. SoCon champs. They beat Rhode Island last week. I know you watched quite a bit of that game. They are dynamite defensively. They got two separate guys who have 7 picks on the season. TJ Moore is a finalist. He's going to Frisco for the Buchanan Award. This is a program that's steadily been building, Mike. They made the playoffs last year. They won a game. They lost to South Dakota State in the second round. They're located in Georgia, so they're going to get players just like Abilene Christian did. Offensively, I'm wondering how challenged they're.
I don't know what that throw there was by the Rhode Island quarterback. I'm not sure Cam Miller is going to make that throw across the middle out of the end zone. But yeah, I mean they're my assumption is, with only having watched a couple of games that they've played, is that they're going to be a lot like, East Tennessee State a couple of years ago.
SoCon teams we've seen.
East Tennessee State maybe earlier this year, right? Some good skilled players, but in the end, North Dakota State, once they started to impose their will, they kind of got things done on the road. Can Mercer run the ball on NDSU? And if they can't, is their quarterback and receivers, are they good enough to move the ball down the field? I don't know that. Can their lines of scrimmage hold up and against North Dakota State? And that's always going to be the question for these smaller conference teams coming into Florida.
Last 3 SoCon teams that played the Bison in the quarters, NDSU's outscored them 96-22.
Yeah.
That's East Tennessee State, Samford, and Wofford.
Yep. But again, and I've said all year, I don't know that this Bison team is an all-timer Bison team. I think they're good in FCS. I don't think that they compared to the 2021 team or the 2019 team. And so you got to keep that in mind that okay, Mercer's okay, they're good, and NDSU isn't quite where they were, and so that closes the gap, I think. And so we'll see. NDSU's favored by 17.5, which is about what one would expect. But we'll see. The atmosphere is not going to be crushing like it used to be back in the Dome, right? It's going to be another 10,000 crowd, I would guess.
Maybe,
yeah.
The other matchups, Idaho-Montana State is a rematch of a game played earlier this season. Only difference there, Idaho has its starting quarterback back. I don't think it changes the result, does it?
Yeah,
Montana State won easily the first time.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, Jason Eck is a good head coach. Idaho's going to be one of those teams that they're going to be able to do some things in FCS because they're a statewide, flagship school in the state of Idaho. But that's a tough ask for Idaho to go up to Bozeman and win that game.
We have just a minute left. That game in Vermillion, we'll keep our eyes on, though. That'll be fun.
I think that's the one that you have to look at and say that's the one that has the best chance of being an upset. As much of a 4-5 game can be an upset. But, USD their defense has given up some points the last 3 games, and we'll see if Davis has what it takes in Vermillion.
Don't forget, we've got Bison men's basketball coming up for you on Friday. Note the start time. It's a noon start against Wisconsin Stout. The Bison also play Western Michigan on Sunday at 1. We'll have both those games for you on WDAY Extra. And then, of course, on Saturday, Bison game day at 10 a.m. on WDAY. And the football game is on WDAY, so please don't call me this week. We got Mercer, North Dakota State, 2:30 kickoff. Winner goes to the semifinals to play the winner of South Dakota State and Incarnate Word for a trip to Frisco. It's going to be a great day of football on Saturday. We thank Mike for stopping by. Thanks so much for watching this week's edition of the Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra. We'll see you next Wednesday.